In this video, we're going to focus on loading meshes into the canvas and viewport so that you can quickly view your textures and materials on your objects while working on your projects. In addition to viewing meshes in the viewport, we're also going to talk about how you can create mesh local variables and mesh inputs so that you can do things like unwrap UVs and texture assets in the same graph. So here we have a blank element graph, and what I'd like to start doing is previewing a material on some of my meshes. So what I'm going to do is go to my graph library here on the left. That's the first icon here at the top. And so what I'm going to do is drag this aged wood here into the element to spawn it as a node. Now, if I want to preview this material on this default cube mesh that comes with InstaMAT, I can right click on the node and choose Preview as 3D Material, and it's going to apply it to the object in my viewport. And this is really useful as I want to continue to tweak the different parameters of this material without having to deal with specifics of a particular mesh. So for example, I can change the knots amount here, or I can change the color if I'd like. So now that I have the material just the way I'd like it, I'd like to bring in my own custom meshes so I can see how this material applies to them. To do that, I'm going to switch to the Package Management panel here, which is the panel that has the cardboard box icon. And I can also press the 2 key. So if I want to switch between the different panels on the left side, I can use the number keys. 1 for the graph library, 2 for the Package Management panel, and 3 for my viewport settings. So I'm going to press 2 for the Package Management panel. And so all I need to do to bring in meshes into my package is just select them. I have them in a window here off screen, and I can just drag them onto the Package Management panel to import them. Now I can go to this Assets category and then the Meshes subcategory, and we can see my meshes have been imported. So if I'd like to start previewing some of these meshes, I can go ahead and hover over them and I can see a nice tooltip with a preview. Or if I'd like to start viewing these meshes in the 3D viewport, I can just double click on them. And now we're viewing this mesh in our 3D viewport with that material assigned. Now, if I'd like to tile this material over the mesh a couple times, I can click this 1 button here to the left of the 3D viewport, and this is going to set the UV scale. So if I click on this 1, you can see it now becomes a 2, and this looks a lot better on my mesh. And in addition to using the number button here, you can also press the U key to quickly change the UV scale as well. So now if I'd like to view other meshes, all I have to do is double click on them and it's going to load it up into the viewport with the UV scale applied. But there's another way to quickly load meshes into the viewport, and that's with the Pick Mesh panel. To bring up the Pick Mesh panel, we can select the 3D viewport and press the V key. Here you can see we have the Pick Mesh panel, and it contains all of the meshes that I currently have in my InstaMAT library. Now, if I'd like to focus on just the meshes that we have in the current package, I can click on this cardboard box icon, which is the same icon that we have for the Package Management panel. And now you can see that I have all of my barrel meshes here filtered out. So if I'd like to load in a different barrel, I can go ahead and double click on one. Then let's say I'd like to adjust my material some more, but I want to see it on a simpler shape. I can go ahead and hit the V key, then I can go back to viewing all of my meshes in the library, and I can choose the sphere. Now let's say I'm done adjusting this material. I want to go back to viewing this on the mesh. I can hit V and go back and select the barrel. So as you can see, it's a very easy process to quickly swap out meshes here using the V key. But you're not just limited to using the keyboard shortcut. You can also go down to the bottom left corner of the viewport and click on these 3 cubes. And this is also going to bring up the Pick Mesh panel. And what's nice is that I can also filter this by searching. So if I want to type in barrel, you can see that only my barrel meshes appear, and I can click on the one that I want. Now, there are other ways of working with meshes in the canvas. For example, what I can do is I can select my meshes here and drag them right into the canvas, and you can see that they become nodes. To view the mesh that's assigned to this particular node, I can right-click on it and choose View Mesh, or I can also left-click on the output pin. Clicking on an output pin is the standard way in the canvas to view the output of a particular node. Now, dragging meshes into the canvas is really a shortcut in creating a local variable for a mesh. And so as you can see on the right here in the Graph Object Editor, which is denoted by this icon here, or you can press Shift-1, we can see that we have all of our local variables here for this particular graph. And we can see that we have each of our barrels here assigned to a variable. Now, if I'd like to create my own local variable from scratch, what I can do is go to this plus button here. And if I want it to be a mesh local variable, I can type in mesh and hit enter. Now what I can do is I can rename this variable to, let's say, working mesh. And I can now assign a mesh to this variable. Let's say I'd like to assign this sphere. Then what I can do is I can drag this variable into the canvas to start working with it. And again, I can right click and choose View Mesh, or I can click on the output pin. Now, what's nice about local variables is that they are private, so they can't be accessed from the outside, and now I can access this information throughout my graph as I need it. And because my mesh is represented as a node, I can now continue to process it. So for example, what I can do is branch out a connection from this variable that we just made called working mesh, and I can do something like optimize. And so now I can bring in the mesh optimize node and do an optimization process here right away. So for example, you can see that I'm doing a 50% optimization on this incoming mesh. But now what I can do is change the mesh that's associated with this particular variable. So I could go over to the graph object editor and change this manually, or I can double click on the node here and quickly bring up the pick mesh panel. Now I can optimize any one of these meshes or continue processing it through a chain of nodes. For example, now I can just switch this out to the barrel, and now I'm doing a mesh optimization on the barrel. Or if I'd like, I could just reconnect a different variable to the mesh optimize node. So we've talked a little bit about how we can use local variables to privately work with meshes inside a particular graph. But now let's take a look at some graph inputs. Graph inputs are the opposite of local variables and allow you to input meshes from the outside and process them through your workflow. Let's take a look at another example. So here's another quick example where I've created this custom element, and what it's going to allow me to do is input a mesh, for example, one of my 3 barrels. It's then going to generate the textures that I need for this mesh and assign the appropriate materials to the particular pieces. So for example, you can see we have the wood here, and we also have the metal here for the handle on the front. It's going to output all the texture maps that I need, and also a UV unwrapped version of this mesh as well. Let's dive into this custom element graph to quickly see what's going on. So here we are inside the custom element that I've created, and the first thing I'm going to do is go up to the toolbar and turn on Link Category Mode. Now, Link Category Mode is going to combine similar connections together so that it's easier to explain this process. First, what we're doing is we have a mesh input, and I'm going to show you how to create a mesh input shortly. We're then feeding that mesh into the mesh unwrapped node, which is going to use a hard surface axial algorithm to generate our UVs. We are then going to feed in the UV unwrapped version of our mesh into the mesh bake node, which is going to bake out our mesh maps and give us things like our curvature, ambient occlusion, and world position maps. It's then going to feed that mesh bake data into a layering project that I've created quickly, which will allow me to assign the materials to the different pieces of my mesh. Now, if you'd like to learn more about layering projects, check out our videos on our YouTube channel. Now, in addition to our mesh baked data, you can also see that the UV unwrapped version of our mesh is also feeding into the layering project. I'm then doing a quick material solidify operation, and then exporting all of my mesh maps as outputs from this element. And in addition to the texture maps, I'm also exporting the UV unwrapped version of our mesh as a mesh output. Now let's go back to the initial graph. Now, effectively what I've done here is I've dragged in my custom element into this empty graph here, and I've exposed all the outputs by right-clicking on the element and choosing Expose Output Parameters. But now I want to generate a mesh input so I can feed in any mesh into my custom element. Just like local variables, I could manually create one by going to the Graph Object Editor and going to the Inputs category and choosing the plus button. But there's an even quicker way to do so, and what I can do is just drag a connection from the mesh input from my custom element to invoke Quick Search, and I can choose Expose Mesh as graph input. Now all I need to do is double click on my input and choose a different mesh. Now with that newly selected mesh, it's now unwrapped the UVs, baked the mesh maps, and it's assigned all of the textures that I need to the proper places on my mesh. For example, you can see that I have this dirt and grime, I've got the wood applied to the sides, and I also have the metal section assigned to the tap and the rings around the barrel. And so now I have all the texture outputs that I need for this mesh, and in addition, I also have a UV unwrapped mesh as well. So now I'd like to export all of my texture maps and my UV unwrapped mesh together, and I can do that with the Output Export dialog box. In addition to setting the image file format extension, I can also choose the mesh file format extension. And if I'd like, I can choose a template. So for example, I can choose to export these textures for Unreal Engine, and it's already going to pack all of the maps that I need. So now that I've chosen this template, I also need to enable the mesh output here so that I can export both the mesh and my textures at the same time. All I need to do now is hit export. By exposing mesh inputs, you can easily integrate your geometry into your texturing workflows. The element graph allows you to combine multiple mediums, such as images and meshes, so that you can create materials and textures and intelligently apply them to your meshes in one procedural workflow. If you'd like to learn more about the element graph or how you can further integrate geometry into your asset creation pipeline with InstaMAT, check out our YouTube channel. Here we have an ever-expanding collection of content ranging from videos focusing on specific concepts like this one to bite-sized tips and tricks with our Swift Session series. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. If you enjoyed this video, drop us a comment below and don't forget to subscribe. For the latest news about InstaMAT, please visit our website and follow us on Twitter. You can find all the links in the video description below. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.